What's up guys? Welcome to a new SAP S/4HANA Cloud Knowledge Snippet. In today's snippet we will be looking at advanced variant configuration. To be more specific, we will be looking at the pricing aspects of variant configuration. As a forward, I would also like to state that there is an expectation that you have a minimalistic understanding of what variant configuration is about and at least have an idea or vague idea of how it works in SAP, as we will not be covering everything that has to do with variant configuration in this particular snippet. So to illustrate today's snippet, let's head off to the Apple website, which if you go to the buying section, in this particular case for a MacBook Pro, there is quite a nice example of what configuration is all about. So typically what you have here is that you have a 15-inch MacBook Pro that can be delivered to customers in various configurations, i.e. the customer could choose a 2.2 gigahertz processor. He could also decide to upgrade to a 2.9. There is also a certain selection that can be done in terms of memory, in terms of graphic cards, storage capacities, as well as pre-installed software. Now what we can see here, and this is the example that we will be replicating in the S/4HANA Cloud system, is that as soon as I come onto the page, I have a base configuration, which is this MacBook Pro, which comes with all of these features. And for these features, the price is going to be $2,399. However, when I do the configuration, I can choose to go for a 2.9 gigahertz processor, which is going to add $400 to my order. And what we can see here is that the configuration characteristics has been selected and my pricing has also automatically been updated to reflect the choice that I've made. Similarly, for memory, you could go for more memory, you could go for a different graphic card, you could go for a different storage space, and you could also opt to have additional software. Now what's also interesting here to see is that there are certain characteristics, certain configuration aspects where I only have one choice. For example, in this particular MacBook Pro, I cannot install two processors. It's one or the other. So if I go for this one, it excludes this one. Similarly, if I pick this one, it excludes the previous choice that I had made. However, there are certain choices where I can have multiple selections. In the case of software, I can decide to pick both these software pieces or none or just one. So this was kind of an introduction of what we will be doing in the S/4HANA Cloud system to illustrate how pricing works for variant configuration. So let's head out to the S/4HANA Cloud system. So now we're in the S4 system, and before we go diving into the meat of today's topic, let's have a quick refresher and look at the material that I'll be using to do this variant configuration. So the material that I have is this one here called PRE MB Pro, which is a reflection of the MacBook Pro that we had on the Apple website. And if I go into the material, let's quickly go over some of the important information that we'll find on a configurable material in the material master. So let's just put in the organizational levels of this material. And some of the key information that we find in configurable materials is that in the basic data to view is the checkbox material is configurable. Now in this particular case, I'm using the standard defined material type, which is KMAT, configurable materials. So this has been automatically activated. You could, however, also select another material type, and if you wanted to make it configurable, the checkbox would be open for input and you could select it there. The other thing that we've done is we have on the classification view, we have created a class and assigned it to the material. So the standard class type is 300 for variants. And in this class, we have defined the various characteristics that make up the product that we are going to be selling and manufacturing. Now, the characteristics match what we have on the Apple website, except for the memory, but we can see that we have the processor, we have the graphic card, we have the storage, as well as the software. Within the definition of those characteristics, we've also highlighted or defined the values that are possible for each one of these characteristics. So for example, the processor, we will be offering two types of processors. Okay, so now that we're in the S4 cloud system, to gain a bit of time, I've already created the characteristics, the classes, the material in the S4 cloud system. So let's go ahead and look at the simulation of the configuration model to see where we are at so far. So I'm just going to be looking at the product that I've already created, which is the MacBook Pro Pascal, same as what we had on the Apple website. And let's go to the draft configuration simulation. So here you'll see that I have my material. Now I haven't set up any bill of material for this particular product as we're only focusing on the pricing aspect in this particular snippet. What this is already here telling us is that we have defined a certain number of characteristics on our product, which are the same ones that we had on when we looked at the characteristics that were assigned to the class that was assigned to the material, and we find them here again. So what we are essentially here saying is that by default, which is what these little tick marks mean, these are default values, it essentially means that when I go into the configuration of this product, I want some values, some characteristics to be evaluated by default. So in this particular case, I have a processor, a storage type, as well as a graphics card that have been already proposed as defaults. The interesting thing that also we want to highlight, which is what I also explained briefly on the Apple website, is that there are certain characteristics where you can only have one choice that is available. So if you pick this one, it's going to be excluding this one. And similarly, if you pick this one, it'll exclude the previous choice that you made. You can only have one characteristic value for this characteristic. However, there are certain other characteristics that can have multiple values, and this is something that you define in the characteristic itself. So in this case here, I could be picking both Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro as the software that I would be wanting to have installed on my product. Now, what's also interesting here is that you might have seen that when I picked these two pieces of software, this other characteristic, which we did not see on the material, called variant condition, has also been automatically updated with two values, which are Logic Pro and Final C Pro. And what these are variant conditions. And this is essentially what's going to be driving the pricing of the product. So what this is essentially telling us is that I've picked these two options, and these two options have driven for this characteristic to be updated with two values, which are Logic Pro and Final C Pro. And then in pricing, the system will be looking at or trying to find variant pricing conditions that have this name as a basis for the condition. And if I then take these off, so in this case here, for example, I've taken Logic Pro off, so the variant condition is removed. It is no longer applicable to this particular material as the basis for pricing. The other thing that you might note is that we have this title here that says a reference characteristic group. Why is it called reference? Well, very simply because these characteristic, this one here, variant condition, is what we call a reference characteristic. And it's called a reference characteristic because it references a standard SAP field. So let's have a look at this particular characteristic, PMB Pro Price Cont, to see what I mean by reference. If I go to the Manage Characteristics Fiori application and we look at this particular characteristic, we'll just go into View mode. When I define this characteristic, I directly went to the Additional Data tab, and I said that this particular characteristic references the table SDCOM and the field VCOND, variant condition. And the table name SDCOM is the pricing communication structure that is used between the pricing of the sales order and the characteristics that I'll be selecting in my material. So this is very important. If you do not have this reference characteristic included somewhere in your configurable material, i.e. if you have not assigned it to one of the classes that has been assigned to your material, your variant pricing will not work. Okay, so this is very important. You need to have a reference characteristic created that references this table name and this field. What you call it, it really doesn't matter. But it's just that the field, the table name and field name are super important and they need to be created. So that's for the reference characteristic. So this is the simulation that we have done. And I've already done quite a few bits of the configuration of this product. So I've defined a certain number of variants, a certain number of procedures. But what we will be doing to highlight the pricing topic of today is we will be looking at what is it that we need to do to be able to price the 3.1 gigahertz quad-core processor in the sales order. So for that, let's go ahead and head out to the VC modeling environment. And again, we pick our product, PREMB Pro. And this is quite an improvement on the previous configuration environment that we had in on-premise. In that on-premise, you obviously had all the various building blocks, such as the characteristics, the configurable materials, the pricing conditions, the dependencies, and so on and so forth. But what this variant configuration environment brings is that it really federates all of these objects together under one roof. So here, for example, I can see that I have my material, I have my configuration profile, I have a couple of dependencies that have already been created and assigned to the configuration profile. I also have the class, which is the one that I created and assigned to my material, and the characteristics that are included in the particular class. And then if I drill a little bit further, I can see the characteristic values as well as the descriptions of these particular characteristic values. And we'll see in a moment just how super useful this is as far as setting up your configuration model. So as I said, what we will be looking at within the context of this particular snippet is how can I influence the pricing of my MacBook Pro if the customer chooses the 3.1 gigahertz quad-core processor. So I'll just show you a few ways of how you can maintain the various dependencies that will drive this particular configuration to take into account the pricing aspects of this particular processor. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to define a variant condition for this 3.1 gigahertz processor. If we look at the Apple website, we can see that with the base configuration, the processor is a 2.2 gigahertz processor, but if I pick the 2.9 gigahertz processor, it's going to add $400 to my overall sales order. So I need to be able to say, well, if the customer picks that particular processor, if he decides to go for an upgrade, how much more am I going to charge him? So this is what we'll do. So I'm just going to go to set material prices. And this is the same application that you would use if you were going to define a base price, so a PPR0 pricing condition in cloud for your product. So there is a couple of pricing conditions that have been defined specifically for variant configuration in the S4 cloud system. And those two conditions are PVA0 and PVA1. Now the difference is that PVA0 is an absolute number. So it would be, for example, plus $100, plus $200, and the PVA1 is a percentage. So very handy if you wanted to add a surcharge, for example. If the customer picks this option, then we add 10%. So we want to add a absolute value. So we want to be able to say it'll be an extra $400 for that particular processor. So I'm just going to pick the PVA0 variant pricing condition. Again, my organizational level information, and this relates to the configurable product PREMB Pro, and we're just going to say execute. And because we are in change mode, the system is also showing me the other variant pricing conditions that have already been defined for my product. So here I have the 1 terabyte solid state disk, which would drive an extra $600 to my order, the 2 terabyte, the 512, the 2 pieces of software, as well as the graphics card. So I now need to tell the system what the variant name is going to be, that the system is supposed to look for if the customer chooses the configuration value of 3.31G for the quad-core processor. So we're going to say that the name of that variant is going to be 31G processor, and it's going to drive an extra, let's see, we'll do the same as Apple does, $400. So if he picks the 3.1 gigabyte processor, it's going to add $400 to the sales order. So I've just hit return, and I can see that the pricing condition is there, $400. So I'm now just going to save this particular pricing condition. So make a note of it. It's 31G Pro. Okay, so I've defined a variant pricing condition. So if we kind of just think about it, what I've done is I've created a characteristic value, 31G, which is supposed to drive an additional value of $400 in my sales order if the customer chooses this processor. So I now need to tell the system which variant it is that it needs to pick if the customer chooses 31G. And there's various ways that you can do this. So number one is you could go into the characteristic itself. And if we look at the characteristic name, it's PREMB Pro processor. So MB Pro, let me Pro sup. Let's just change that, and it's going to change mode. So this is the characteristic that I defined earlier on, and if we go to the values tab, we see that we have those two values, 2AG and 31G. Now you also have this D column, which stands for dependency, and it at the moment is blank because there is no dependency assigned to this particular value. Now if you wanted to assign a dependency, so I want to be able to tell the system that if the salesperson picks 31G, the variant condition 31G Pro should apply to the sales order. So what you can do is you can pick the value, and then you can go to more, extras, object dependency, and here you have two choices. You can either assign a dependency, so if you had created the dependency previously, you can simply reuse it and assign it to this characteristic value in your characteristic. The other thing that you can do is you can go directly to the editor and maintain the dependency directly for that value in the characteristic. So let's go to the editor. And here the system is asking me a few questions. So he's saying, okay, so what kind of a dependency are you trying to do? Is it going to be a precondition or is it a procedure? What I want to do here is a procedure. I want to be able to, based on a user input, based on a choice, create or update another characteristic. And the processing mode is we are going to go for the advanced variant configuration. So here we go to continue, and one of the things that I don't really like that much here is that I don't really know what the rest of my configuration environment looks like. So I don't really know what the class is, I don't know what the material is, so I'm losing a little bit of context. But you could absolutely, if you wanted to, maintain the configuration, the dependency code right in this screen here. If you're going to do that, then I would suggest that you open up another screen with the modeling environment where you would have access to all of the other values. And what we're trying to do here is we want to influence the characteristic PREMB Pro price cond. What we want to do is we want to be able to say that this characteristic will take on the value of 31G Pro, which is the variant pricing condition that we had created, if the customer picks 31G. Now we don't need to specify 31G because I'm assigning the dependency to this particular value already. So what I'm going to do here is I just need to say that PREMB Pro price cond, so PREMB Pro price cond equals, and because it's going to be text, so I need to put in quotes, and we said 31G Pro, which is the, whoops, G Pro, which is the name of the variant pricing condition that we had created. Now, of course, what you can do is once you've done your code, you can just say quick check to make sure that, of course, we've got a bit of an issue here. So I'm just going to say that it's $self, because it's at this level that this dependency is going to happen, and the system tells me that the syntax check is error-free. So this particular dependency is now good to go. So I'm just going to save this. Okay, so now that I've saved this dependency that I added to my product, we can see that the column has been, my apologies, it wasn't D, this is for default. The object dependency checkbox has been activated, meaning that there is a dependency assigned to the characteristic value. So let me save this change to the characteristic, and let's get out of there. If I now go back to the variant configuration model environment for my material and look at the characteristic for this particular class. So we changed the processor and we can now see that associated with the value 31G, we have a dependency assigned to it. Now this is the dependency that I just created when I was in the characteristic. So again, this kind of highlights what I was saying earlier on about the configuration model here really being a federating object under which I can see everything that has to do with the configuration of this particular product. And of course, what you can do is you could double click on this particular dependency, and by the same token as what I did in the characteristic, edit the code for it. Now what I like here as well is that you have this additional text here that says choosing characteristic value PRMB processor 31G causes the following inference. So it's self PREMB Pro pricing condition is equal to 31G Pro. So which is essentially what I added as the dependency. Now the one thing that I don't like about maintaining dependencies directly in the object as I did here for the characteristic is that by just looking at the dependency here, the name, the code of it, I know that it's what we call a local dependency. So this dependency is only valid for this value and cannot be reused. So there's two downsides here, which is that number one, just by looking at this number here, 0027, it doesn't really tell me what kind of a dependency it is that it's driving. It's just a numerical identifier. And the second downside is that I will not be able to reuse it somewhere else. So it's a choice that you have to make if you want to maintain it that way. But personally, it's not my preference. So now that we've added this particular pricing condition, let's have a quick look at if I was going to create a sales order, how would that work? Would that pricing condition get picked up? So again, we're just going to say normal sales order. Yep, I know division is 00. We'll pick 1710. A customer. We're not going to save this order, it's just to test the configuration. So I put in my material PREMB Pro will buy quantity of 1. Now the system detects that this is a configurable material and automatically takes me to the variant configuration screen. And you're here presented with the characteristic values of the product. Now again, you can see here that the default values are proposed, and we also have a base price of the product that is updated. So for $2,399, I get a MacBook Pro with this 2.8 gigahertz processor, 256 gigabytes of storage, and the Radeon Pro with 2 gigabyte memory graphic card. Now what we did was we added a characteristic dependency on the value 31G. We also created the pricing condition 31G Pro. So if I pick the 31G quad core option, I would expect the variant condition characteristic to be updated with the name of the pricing variant that I created, but I also expect the price of my product to be upped by $400. And what we can see is that the dependency that we added has correctly worked. So the system added the variant condition 31G Pro, or should I say the value 31G Pro, to the characteristic variant condition. This is my reference characteristic, if you recall, the one that was created. And then the dependency said, well, if this characteristic has this value 31G Pro, I want to add the pricing condition of $400 to the product. So we can see that the price has been correctly upped based on this particular option that we had chosen. And if I say done, we can quickly go to the pricing conditions of this product, and we can see that we should have a pricing condition. Here we go, PVA0 31G Pro $400, which is the pricing condition that we had added. So the dependency has worked as we expected it would. So I'm just going to cancel and not save this particular sales order. I'm just going to say yes. And I'll show you another way of maintaining this pricing dependency. So let me just go back to the configuration model for my product. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this particular dependency. So again, this is one of the features that I really like with the new configuration environment, is that you have context sensitive functions that are available. So for example, here you can assign a dependency, you can create a dependency. And in this particular case, I want to remove it. So I'm just going to say remove the dependency 0027. I'm going to say yes to get rid of it. You could also have engineering change management kick in, especially if you wanted to have a date validity on this particular change. And I'm going to say save. Okay, so another way of doing this particular pricing is to have a dependency assigned to the configuration profile of your product. Again, this really is a question of choice. What I showed you earlier on was how you could assign a dependency to a characteristic value. And what we did was we went into the characteristic, we picked the value 31G, and we added the dependency there. You could also have done that very same thing by coming to the configuration environment, selecting the value, doing a right click, and then doing a assign or create dependency. Now, the great thing about doing it here is that you have an additional option, which is not just local. You could also here, for example, pick a global reusable dependency. So that's a really cool feature to have there as well. But another choice that you could be doing, which is the one that I've opted for here, is that you might want to centralize your procedures in logical functions. And what I mean by that is that if you imagine a product that had, say, 100 characteristics, each characteristic had maybe 5 values, and each one of these values was going to drive a particular variant condition. I mean, you can quickly see that if you are trying to if you're not familiar with that product and you're trying to debug or understand, where the pricing the variant configurations are, and you might have to sift through quite a few of these items until you find exactly what it is that you're looking for. What I've done in this particular case is I've set up an overall procedure which I've called pricing. So another advantage that you have over the local dependencies here is that you can actually name them and give them a bit of a more logical name. So for example, here I've created this dependency called pricing. So it would kind of seem logical that this is where you would find pricing information. You can also see here that I have this particular dependency called set default values. And this is what drives, let's have a quick look at it. This is the dependency that drives the default values that we see whenever we enter the configuration of the product. And if we look at the particular code, essentially all we're doing here is we're saying that the graphics default value is going to be 1. And again, a cool feature that I really like in this modeling environment is that you can see the characteristics and the values that are impacted by this dependency. Very, very cool feature. And of course, in case you did not know, you can also add comments to your code, which is of course very helpful if you're a team of people that are working on the configuration of a product. So rather than just having to sift through code to try and understand what's happening, where it's happening, you can add those comments in there to make it a little bit easier to understand and follow what's happening. So let's go ahead and go to the pricing procedure. And what we're going to do is we're just going to enhance it with the processor. Okay, so now I'm in the procedure which I have previously created and used for the other elements that pertain to the configuration of my MacBook Pro. And now I'll go to the editor. I'll go into change mode because I want to update the configuration dependencies. Again, engineering change management could have been used to give a date validity on the changes that I'm about to do. And from the code, again, you can see here that it's fairly nice and easy to read, in that I've provided some help along the way if somebody else was going to be picking up this particular configuration, to understand exactly what it is that we are doing and where we're doing it. So we're setting pricing variants. This is to do with the pricing of the storage, the software, and the graphics. So I'm not going to add a new section which relates to the processor. Again, I have my characteristic name and values nicely at hand here, so I'm just going to correct the spelling mistake as well. So I'm just going to add another comment to say that this is the processor pricing conditions. And what I want to do is I want to be able to say that the reference characteristic pricing condition is going to be equal to a certain value if another characteristic processor has the value 31G added to it. Now also you'll notice the difference between the previous dependency that I maintained at the value level directly in the characteristic was that here I just need to say that, you know, we'll pick 31G if the or rather what I said was that pricing condition characteristic would be equal to 31G Pro, and that was it. Here, however, because this dependency is at the configuration profile level, I need to provide the system a little bit more context, i.e. I need to actually tell him, if this is done, then this is what you'll do. So I want to be able to say that the $self pricing condition characteristic, so I can copy, paste, and reuse some of the code. It's going to be equal to 31G Pro. If you recall, that is the name of the pricing variant that I had added. And I want to have this pricing condition apply to my configuration model if the characteristic PREMB processor, so PREMB processor is equal to the value of 31G. Now, because I also want the system to evaluate the rest of the expressions, I need to give it a comma. So I'm just going to say comma, as opposed to full stop. For example, you can see here at the end, at the very last statement that I've got a full stop. In terms of structuring the code, it really is also up to you. You can do it on one line, you can do it on several lines. The reason for why I've done it on a couple of lines is that you know, you're limited in the number of characters that you'll be able to see on this screen. So at some point, it's going to return and start a new line. And also from a readability point of view, I just find that it's a lot easier to do it this way. So essentially I'm providing the context. So I'm saying that pricing condition is equal to 31G Pro if the processor selected is 31G. Again, I'm going to save my updated dependency. There's a syntax check that is also done whenever you save a dependency to make sure that you won't have any issues during the configuration, or at least within the reach of this dependency. So I've updated this dependency, and let's give that a try again. So let's go to creating a sales order. I'll input the same information as before. So sales order type OR 1710, distribution channel 10, 00. I'll put the same customer, test configuration, same material, same quantity, and again we are sent into the configuration screen. As before, we have a base price that is presented to us. So the MacBook Pro in this configuration, the default configuration, is worth $2,399 US. If I pick the 3.1 gigahertz quad core, which is the dependency that we've just updated, then I should see my price increase by $400. And the reason for that is because we had the dependency that once again said, if you pick 3.1 gigahertz quad core, then update this reference characteristic with the variant value 31G Pro, which corresponds to a variant pricing condition that has just changed the price of my product. We'll go and add some additional more pricey options to the MacBook Pro. So we'll go for a 512 solid state disk, which is going to once again add a new variant condition value to my characteristic, which also has an influence on the price of the product. We'll also get a better graphics card, which again is going to update the reference characteristic and the price of my product. And we are going to pick Final Cut Pro, but not Logic Pro. And again, we have the reference characteristic being updated as well as the price. If we click on Done and once again go and check the pricing conditions of the material, we should now have several variant pricing conditions in the pricing procedure of our sales order. So there we go. So we have the base price, and then we have PVA 0 condition types that represent the variants that were added in the configuration of my product. And here they are. And again, here we have the variant names. So there you go. I hope that you've enjoyed this recording. As usual, please do subscribe, leave a comment, and turn on notifications to be made aware of new recordings. Thank you. We hope to see you soon again.